My name's Clay Scroggins. I have been a pastor in Atlanta for about 20 years. I moved to Atlanta to go to Georgia Tech, studied engineering there, and then went to school to study theology, and came back and have been pastoring here for a while. And now I'm a preacher, speaker, do a lot of corporate stuff, do a lot of church on the weekends. Purpose on Tap. I mean, I've heard about it for years because all the cool kids in Atlanta go to Purpose on Tap. No, I've got loads of friends. Clayton Edwards is a good friend of mine. Matthew's become a good friend of mine, and it's been great to learn about what God's doing through it. I've been a professional Christian for a long time now, but about 8 months ago, I resigned from my role at Buckhead Church, which has been a really interesting faith experience because I've had to start relearning what faith is like when you're not a professional Christian. And God's been really good to me through all that. It's just been a great experience. I've learned that our emotional health is the greatest barrier between where we want to be and where we currently are. And the only way to become more aware of what's really going on inside of us is to turn down the noise of life low enough and long enough to be ruthlessly curious about what's inside of us. That's hard to talk about with men, but hey, you gotta grip it and rip it, you know? That's what we're gonna do tonight. You can't work on what you're not aware of. And so there's a lot of men walking around, me included, often days, with emotions, feelings inside of us that we don't even realize are there, that we haven't stopped to pay attention to and recognize. So my hope is that on a night like this, that this would be a really great night for men to turn down the noise for a few minutes, a few moments, and allow God to help them discover what's inside. The good news is He doesn't leave us alone to go fix it. He says, I'll partner with you. Let's work on it together. And that's really good news.
Thank you guys so much for being here. I want to bring up my man Clay. Thanks, brother.
Thanks, Clayton. Love you. Love you too. Thank you, man. Oh, guys, what's up? I am so glad to be here. Good to see everybody. Listen, there's Alan, by the way. Hey, I saw you over there. Good to see you. I think this is the second environment in my life. I've been a pastor for about 20 years, and this is probably the second time I've ever been in an environment that combined Bible preaching and beer. And I don't know, I'm down with all of that for sure, but it usually means the talks are a little looser. I do have 5 kids, and so being not at home on a night is abnormal for me. I saw your abnormal shirt, sir, right as I was saying that word. That was weird. But it's going to be a great night. It'll be tough. I'm going to try to do this in about 20 minutes. But I feel real comfortable. Feel real glad to not be at home right now, honestly. Glad to be with you guys. I want to talk about noise. This is a good environment to do that in because you can just hear, there's just stuff happening, you know? There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise in life right now. I don't know if you guys have noticed this. And we're coming out of a season for a couple of years where there just wasn't a lot of noise. Things were a little quieter. And as life has just kind of snapped back to normal in a lot of ways, all the noise of life just continues to get turned up. I don't want to talk about the noise though that people put on us. I want to talk about the noise that we control. We control most of the noise in our life. We control more of the noise in our life than I think any of us really realize, probably. Before I jump into that, let me just tell you a quick story. I was, as Clayton mentioned, first of all, that was an awesome introduction, Clayton. Thank you. That was all very humbling, awesome to hear. I was a pastor for 20 years in Atlanta, worked at North Point Ministries, worked for Andy Stanley for a long time. He's been a great mentor for me and a really great person to work for. But I got to the point where I realized my job was great, but my job was not right anymore. And that's difficult. Maybe some of you have gone through job change. Maybe some of you are in the middle of a season right now where you kind of feel the weight of, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? That's a heavy feeling. That's not an easy season to be in, and so I feel you if that's where you are. One of the moments for me that I knew something's got to give is I was sitting in my boss's office, and I had been to a meeting earlier that week where they were passing around a bunch of numbers, a bunch of data. Data is not emotional. Data is black and white. Any of you like in data, you do data, you look at numbers all day? A couple of you, that's awesome. You get it, you know, there aren't a lot of emotions connected with data. It's just, hey, these are the numbers. So we were looking at some of the numbers, and some of the stuff, it made it look like I wasn't doing my job very well, and that bothered me. I have been fortunate in my life. Most of the things I've tried to do, I've been able to do them. I failed physics in college. That's pretty much the last time that I had really failed at something that felt significant. And so feeling like a failure is kind of it's a hard thing, right? Nobody likes that feeling. Feeling like a failure is not great, but feeling like you're being perceived as a failure, that's even worse. And so I think that's what I was experiencing in that moment, but I didn't realize it. I just was talking to my boss in my boss's office. I don't know if any of you have ever cried at work. Not many of you. Thank you for that, Franklin. That's awesome. A few of you have. I've never cried at work. And at the time, if somebody would have said, how do you feel about crying at work? I would have been like, I would not judge anyone if they did that, but that's not really for me. I'm not really a crier in general in life, but certainly not at work. So we're in the middle of this conversation. We're going back and forth about these numbers. We start arguing. The conversation's pretty robust. And I feel, that moment where you feel emotions starting to rise? And usually you can talk to it. Usually you can be like, hey, now's not the time, Like you're sitting in your boss's office. But I couldn't control it in a way. It was crazy. I just lost it. Started crying, that was embarrassing enough. But what was most embarrassing is that my boss is a pastor. I'm a pastor. And so we both know what this is like. When somebody's crying in front of you, pastors deal with this all the time. So you've got a number of things that you go to. First, you feel it out. You're like, how long have they been crying? If they haven't been crying that long, you might try to crack a joke. Try to immediately get this thing to stop quickly. Sometimes you take a step back and you give them some time, give them some space. But in this case, my boss went for the jugular pretty quickly. He looked at me and he said, can I pray for you? And I said to my boss, who's a pastor, being a pastor, I said, no, you cannot pray for me. I don't know why. I think I just felt like it was patronizing. I felt like I was like, I know what you're doing. I also was like, I need to get out of here. I was experiencing something inside that I didn't know what to do with. And I honestly didn't like it. Nobody likes to experience something that you can't identify, that you don't know what it is. And I fortunately, I said, can we just pick this up and talk about this Monday? He kept saying, are you okay? And I kept being like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm clearly not fine. I'm crying about a spreadsheet, So I walk out to my car, bump into like two people that reported directly to me. They come up to me, hey, quick, we're good. We'll just talk to you later. They kind of immediately identified it. I go out to my car, and that drive home was, it was a hard drive home. For one, it's hard to see the road through tears. But secondly, I just felt so confused. I was like, where is this coming from? What is going on? When we had we do have little kids, as Clayton mentioned. We've got 5 kids, 13, 11, 9, 7, and 4. Those are their ages, not their names. Some of those would be great names. And ever since they were little kids, we started using white noise. Any of you sleep with white noise? What do you use, Zach?
I use a little, it's called a sleep mate. It sits on my nightstand.
It's precious, Zach. Use a sleep mate. My sleep mate is my noise machine. That's awesome, man. I use something real similar to that. I didn't before we had kids though, but when you have little kids, you realize like the greatest thing is to get those kids to sleep. It's like, that's first of all, it's like your only shot, but also it's like the moment that you cherish more than anything else. And so the worst thing in the world is for something or someone to wake them up while they're sleeping. And so you crank the white noise. We got 5 kids, we got noise machines in every one of their rooms. So you walk in our house, it's like a cacophony of all kinds of sounds. And what I've learned about white noise machines, or white noise in general, is white noise is a masking device. We turn it up, and what's the point of it? What does it do? Yeah, it covers up. It doesn't actually, it drowns them out. Maybe that's the right way to say it, Ben. Another way to say it would be, it masks the things that we don't want to hear. And in the same way that white noise masks the things we don't want to hear, I have found that all of us use distractions. We use some kind of noise in our life to cover up the things we don't want to feel. And if you're not careful, those things are inside of you. They're inside of you whether you know they're there or not. And if you're not careful, you end up crying in your boss's office confused by your emotions because you've been masking them for a while. That's what I figured out that day. I was like, oh, I've been masking these emotions for a long time. There's been this stuff that's been inside of me that I didn't even know was there. And I've been using distraction to turn it up and cover it up for a long time. When Jesus was talking about prayer in Matthew 6, Jesus says, he says, when you pray, go into a room, close the door in secret, and pray to your Father who is in secret. And when you do, he will reward you. Which I think is a really interesting philosophy, that somehow there is this portal that we can enter in where we can commune with our Father, where we can connect with him, and he can help us with those things that we're feeling. He can help us deal with those. Jesus said in the chapter just before this, he said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Which I don't know how you feel about seeing God, but I'm very interested, not just in seeing God, but I'm very interested in how God sees. I'm very interested in seeing my life the way God would see my life. I'm very interested in seeing my future the way God would see my future. I know I need to be able to see the way God sees. And so the idea of being able to see God is a pretty big deal, but you can only get there when you're pure in heart. He says, blessed are the pure in heart. That it seems like in both cases he's insinuating that if you will quiet the noise, if you'll turn down the noise low enough and long enough, that you may actually be able to see God, that you may actually be able to see like he sees, that you may actually be able to experience the reward that he wants to give you. Which I've found that the reward is not a new job, the reward is not a spouse, the reward is not a child, the reward is not a car, the reward is him. The reward is getting to know him better, letting him know you better, being in a deeper relationship with him. But until we quiet the noise, until we turn the noise down low enough and long enough to be ruthlessly curious of what's going on inside of us, I think we're all in a similar spot, that we could miss him, that we could miss what is inside of us. We could miss what it is that he wants to do. Probably 8 years ago, I had this moment that, you know, sometimes when you're stunned by someone that you least expect to be stunned by, you never forget it. I was at our, I would speak at our high school camp a lot for our church until I aged out. They quit inviting me to come because I got too old. And I'll never forget, there was this moment where the worship leader, he's playing in front of high school students, so this is not like the most, this isn't a real intense environment. But this dude's a real perfectionist, and he was he was trying to start this song, but he kept looking back at the drummer, and I was kind of watching the drummer. The drummer's like fidgeting with his computer, and he couldn't get the song started. Evidently, you have to like cue the track, you know. And his computer something was going on, and so he kept like messing with it, I could tell. And the worship leader, I could tell like the longer it went on, he kept like looking back at him like you could tell he was agitated. So I'm standing off to the side, I'm about to go up there to preach, and there's like a video in between, so there was a couple minutes, and they come off stage, and I thought we were about to have a fight off stage, which I was like, I'm here for that. That would be very interesting to see. But this drummer looks at the worship leader, and he says, hey man, 2 things. Number 1, if you ever look at me like that on stage again, I'm gonna kill you. Which I was like, whoa, that's serious. And he said, number 2, whatever it is inside of you that's that close to the surface, you need to deal with it. And I was like, whoa, that's real. All of us have got stuff. We've got, maybe you feel passed over at work, maybe you're in a season of loneliness. Maybe you're experiencing like a bout of inadequacy. Maybe you feel like an imposter. Maybe you feel like you don't have what it takes. Maybe you are in a season of depression. Maybe you're questioning, what are you supposed to be doing? All of us have seasons like that. And if we're not careful, we'll use all the noise of life, working a lot, hobbies, alcohol, sports, and we'll just keep turning it up louder and louder because nobody wants to really face that stuff. Nobody wants to deal with that stuff. And so as I was thinking about tonight, I was thinking, you know what? Maybe the best thing that any one of us could do is just say, you know what? I need to figure out how to turn the noise down low enough and long enough to be ruthlessly curious of what's going on inside of me. And there's a number of things that will happen if you do that. Number 1, you get a better vision for your own life. You start to see your own life and where you think maybe God has put you on this earth for and where he wants to take you. Number 2, you start to experience the relationships around you at a deeper level. If you want to connect with your spouse more deeply, if you want to connect with the people that you work with more deeply, if you want to connect with your roommates or your friends more deeply, I'm telling you, being able to turn down the noise low enough and long enough to pay attention to what's going on inside of you will help you connect with them at another level. But thirdly, what if God wants to tell you something? What if God wants to get your attention with something? What if God has something for you? What if he's got something he wants you to start, something he wants you to do, somewhere he wants you to go? It would be awful if we missed it because there was too much noise, right? What I've found about God is he rarely shouts over the noise. He usually is patient and he waits for us to turn it down low enough and long enough to be able to pay attention to what's going on inside of us. Now, every now and then, he does turn it down. I mean, you know people, maybe you've experienced where somebody loses their job, somebody goes through a tragic divorce, somebody loses someone, somebody has a season where the noise just gets turned down and they're forced to face what's going on inside of them. But that's rare. Most of the time, God patiently waits, and in his love and his kindness, he doesn't shout above all the noise that we have in our life. He waits for us to turn it down so that we can pay attention to what's going on inside of us. If that's scary to you, which honestly that's pretty scary for me. I don't really like to deal with negative emotions. I don't like to deal with what's going on inside of me. One of the things I love most about God is he is a loving father who says, hey, I'm not sending you off to go deal with your stuff and then come back. But in his kindness, in his goodness, he says, if you will turn down the noise low enough and long enough, I will enter into it with you. I'll go help you deal with it. Over and over again in Psalms, David writes, God, would you search me? God, would you test me? God, would you see what's inside of me? Would you help me see what's inside of me? so that we can deal with it together. And so that's the great news about God, is he doesn't say, hey, go figure it out, and then once you get it figured out, come back and we'll talk. He says, no, if you'll turn it down, whether it's through prayer, whether it's through fasting, whether it's through a Sabbath, if you'll turn it down low enough and long enough to be ruthlessly curious of what's in there, he says, that's when I will come in and help you figure it out. That's when I'll come and help you deal with the loneliness. I'll help you deal with the inadequacy. I'll help you deal with the feeling of apathy that maybe you're experiencing. And so that's great news. That's great news for all of us. I don't know what your relationship with God is like, but you don't have to be scared of him. You don't have to be worried about what he's going to think. He's a loving father who says, hey, I want to help. I want to get in there with you. So why don't you turn it down low enough and long enough to be ruthlessly curious of what's inside. Hey, let me pray for us, and then I think we're going to open it up and do a little Q&A. Do you guys moderate the Q&A? I should have asked you that, or do I just handle it on my own? I'm great to handle it on my own, but I don't want to steal that opportunity from any of you.
We want you to repeat the questions, please.
Repeat the questions. Franklin, I will do that for you, and for you alone. I will not do it for anyone else. All right, let's pray. Father, there is a lot of noise in this world. There's stuff that we just keep turned up because we feel like we have to. We just can't stand the silence. We can't stand the feeling of what if I had to deal with what's going on inside of me. And I just pray tonight, I mean, it's amazing how miraculous you are that on a night like this, that you have the power to be able to change everything inside of us. And so we just invite you in. Whatever you want to do in us, we just trust that it's good, and we trust that it's worth it. And we trust that with you, anything's possible. That you can change things, that you can fix things, you can grow things, you can move things, you can remove things that have been there for a long time. And we just beg you to do that if you so choose. I pray that we'll have the boldness to be able to invite you in at a corporate level, but more importantly, at a personal level. I just trust that maybe tonight there's somebody that would want to just surrender to you and just say, hey, whatever you want to do, I'm all yours. And I just pray that whatever conviction that needs to happen to believe that you're not going to shout above the noise, that we really believe that you've spoken throughout time, you've spoken through a cloud, you've spoken through a small little fire, you've spoken through a still small voice. And so we just pray that whatever you want to say, whatever you want to do, that we would be courageous enough to turn down the noise to make sure we don't miss it, so that we can hear you, hear from you, whatever it is that you want to do in us. God, thanks for Purpose on Tap. What an amazing environment this is. There aren't a lot of places that are real. And I just get the sense that this is a group of people that just want to be real, that want to experience life for what it is. And we just pray that you'll use it tonight. Do whatever you want to do. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right. Anybody have a thought or a question or a what about? Ron said, let's talk about silence. What does that look like? What does that look like from you? Called me to the carpet. You said, what are you doing about silence? That's good. Thanks, Ron. So, in general, most people don't like silence. Most people, if we were to cut all the noise off, we wouldn't be able to make it. I think the quietest place in the world is this chamber in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that's like at 16 decibels or something. And if you walked in for the longest anybody's spent in there is like 30 minutes, you'd pass out. So we're not really, we're not made to experience total silence, but all of us have different levels of silence for sure. How many of you like silence? Like you love hunting, you want to go like sit in a deer stand and just like listen in nature, and yeah, those are usually the serial killers, so be careful. No, just kidding. So what I would say, I'm going to dodge your question, Ron. God has given us a number of spiritual disciplines that if we would use them, they create rhythms where we don't have to let things get super loud, but they're ways that we check in on our soul. So one of them is fasting. People fast from food, people fast from social media, people might fast from, vacation really is a form of fasting, I would say. Fortunately, I'm married to someone who about at the beginning of every month decides there's something she's going to pause, and she invites me in and then doesn't judge me whether I say yes or no. So she'll say, hey, this month I'm not going to eat any sugar. This month I'm not going to be on social media. This month I'm going to abstain from alcohol. This month I'm not going to have any impulsive purchases. So that's her form of fasting, which I take part in about half of those. The Sabbath is a way to turn down the noise. The Sabbath is a form of quieting the noise. If we were to, the Sabbath is such a gift, but one of the things it does for me is when I take some time off, whether it's a 24-hour period every 7 days, or whether it's a week every summer, or whether it's a month every year, one of the things I learn is that, I'm not actually that important. I like to think I'm really important. I like to think that, if I don't, it's not going to make it. Or if I don't, show up at work, what are they going to do? Which I'm sure you all know this, but if you don't show up at work, they're going to figure it out. They might be, spun around for a day or two, but if any of us were removed from this earth, there would be a hole there, and then the earth would slowly just fill in the hole. That's just the way life works, which the Sabbath teaches us that. I think it teaches us humility. It teaches us that we aren't our job, and that our job doesn't really need us either. So those are two of them. Silence, meditation, prayer, that's another one. For me, it's the rhythm in the morning. I have to get up earlier than our kids get up. That's the way that I experience, that's the only way I experience silence. So for me, if I'm not up before 6, I have no silence during the day. That's when I find my time to be alone and commune with God. Reading the Bible is a rhythm to be able to check in on our soul. I don't read the Bible well unless I'm doing it with other people. So right now, I just invited 10 guys to say, hey, let's read the Bible together this year. Those are some rhythms that I do to try to keep my soul in check. I would say they're similar to exercise and eating right and all those other things we try to do. Thanks for the question, Ron. Matthew asked about a career transition that I just made. I was a pastor for about 20 years and quit my job about 8 months ago, and been doing my own thing. So I'll talk just a bit about that experience. So my good buddy Bryson Vogeltance is here tonight, which he's a big part of this story. I had some, the way it all started for me is I was experiencing a lot of restlessness at work, which I would say some of the signs that I think are worth paying attention to. Number one, I had worked in the same place for 18 years. So I think, that was good for me to make the realization that, okay, I'm not quitting a job that I just started 6 months ago, all right? So I had been at the same organization for 18 years, and I was having trouble resetting my positivity. I am generally a very positive person, but little things would happen, or they didn't even feel little, but now looking back, they weren't that big of a deal, but they would happen, and I couldn't reset my positivity. And I found myself overly consumed with things I could not control. I was overly consumed with things I had very little influence on. So, there's 3 buckets in life. There are things that you have direct control over, there are things that you can influence, and there are things at work that you have no control over, things in your life that you have no control over. And so there were a lot of things in this bucket that I was getting real worked up about that were really bothering me. So I had some friends, 4 of them, that said, hey, we want to come meet with you, which I was like, to hell you do. So that was my first response. I didn't say it, but that's what I thought. Because I was like, I see what's happening. They're trying to tell me I need to quit my job. And so I bailed on the first one. I was like, I'm not doing that. Y'all are going to try to talk me into quitting my job. I get it. And they're like, no. They swore to me they weren't, which they did. And they said, no, we want to talk about you. What they said was, we believe you need to go off and try to wrestle with your career, but we know you're such an extrovert, you're not going to go do that alone, so we want to come do that with you. Can we come and spend an afternoon with you and do that? Which I think that was a huge deal to me to realize that I had people in my life that loved me and cared enough about me to talk about my life for an afternoon. It felt very selfish for me. It was honestly really hard for me to sit there and let them do it. But they asked me a bunch of questions about, what makes you come alive, what's your passion, where do you see yourself, what's your vision for your life, what do you want to do, what do you not want to do, what do you like, what do you not like. And throughout that whole thing, there were a couple of really important moments. I mean, one of them, they said, hey, we want whatever God wants for your life. And if he wants you to stay in your job, great. If he wants you to do something different, great. But we just want to let you know, we believe God has more for you than what you've already experienced. That was great. One of them said, hey, I'm just curious, why is quitting the worst thing in the world to you? And I had never answered this question out loud, but as I was thinking about it, I said, well, quitting's not the worst thing in the world to me, but it is to my dad. And that was really good. I was like, I should probably pay attention to that. So how many of you have a father that worked in the same job for 30 or 40 years? Half the room. Yeah. I think that generation looks at our generation and they're like, what do you mean you don't love your job? Who cares? Do you have a job? Then that's enough, And I'm like, I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel purpose. And they're like, that's not the point. The point is it's a job. You go and do it and you find all that other stuff somewhere else. And so that's kind of the way my dad was. My dad was just like, look, I mean, he had a job in sales for 40 years. I think about 30 years, he loved it. And so another friend asked me, said, well, what changed in your dad? I was like, I don't really know. I think you got a new boss or they changed the structure or something. And they said, what would you want to tell your dad around year 30? And I was like, well, I'd want to tell him that, Dad, there's so much more, and you can't see what's on the other side, but God does, and you, in your mind, whatever, if you were to go do something different, it'd be worse, but you don't know that, maybe it'd be better, and all this stuff. And of course, he's like looking at me being like, yeah, And so he's basically like talking me into giving myself that same advice. That was a big deal. I brought my bosses into the process, which I don't know what you should do about that. I worked in an organization where I could bring them in on this conversation. That was good. But once I did, there was a little bit of like, you passed the point of no return, So that was a little bit scary. And then I got to the point where I said, look, this is what it would take for me to stay here. And they pretty much said, well, we don't want to do that. And so then there was a little bit of a stalemate. And I said, well, I need to go do something different then, I think, which I didn't know what I was going to do, which that's pretty scary. You're not supposed to run from something. You're supposed to run to something. And that was really hard for me because I felt like I was running from something for sure. I would say the things I learned in that process, when you leave a job, you ought to try to leave like you're going back. I think that's really important. And that was a big deal for me. I was trying to leave in such a way that I could go back. And I feel like I could. Last maybe 2 weeks ago, Andy Stanley texted me and asked me if I'd preach this summer. With delight, I told him that I was already booked to preach somewhere else this summer. But I greatly appreciate you asking me. I'm just kidding. No, but I was like, that's really awesome that we have the kind of relationship that he could ask that. And that feels really great to me. My wife and I, we still go to Buckhead Church, so that was a big deal too. We wanted to still be able to go to church there. So Sunday, on Mother's Day, we'll go to church together for the first time in 20 years, and I'll go put on a t-shirt and go serve in our kids ministry and greet parents as they drop their kids off, which that feels really good too, to be able to still go to our church. Another thing I learned is that I don't think God needs any of us to do anything. I think that's a big part of my story, is that I felt like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, and I don't know that God works that way. I don't know if he has you're supposed to do this. I think he's going to do what he wants to do, and if we want to join in on where he's working, he would be delighted to allow us to. But the goal of our life should be with him, get to know him, stay with him, and try to serve others and love others really well. So I'll stop there, Matthew, but that's my resignation story. Thanks for asking about that. There's a lot of people resigning from jobs these days, that is for sure. And the good news is, if you resign from your job, you will probably find another one. I did have a counselor tell me, she said, if you're thinking about it this much, you probably should quit. And I think that's really wise. I think if you're really thinking about it, you probably should do it, unless you've been there 6 months. but the human brain was made for variety. We come alive with variety. So you might just need to go do something different. And if you leave in such a way that you could go back, maybe you'll go back. But if you're really feeling this way, go do something different. See what it's like. That's been my experience. What else? Stan, what you got? What's going on in your life, man? Stan said, have you always had these kind of friends, and are you good about talking about your feelings, and have you always talked about your feelings? So I hate my feelings. So I do not easily talk about my feelings and emotions, but I have a couple of friends that I have found that force intimacy. And I think that's really important. If that's you, if you feel like I'm not really a person that does that really well, you need to find a couple of friends that will force it. Bryson's been that for me. Bryson, if you're going to be friends with him, he's going to be all in your face about stuff. And for some people that might turn them off, that might be like, whoa, that's too much. But I just knew for me, I need a couple of friends that are going to demand that we're going to talk about real life. And if you don't have, I'm just telling you, it's crazy. John Mulaney on Saturday Night Live about 2 years ago did this whole stand-up thing around how his dad has no friends. And he said, I don't know what it is about my dad's generation, but they don't have any friends. And that's not, of course, that's not always true, but I do think the older you get in life, the harder it is to keep friends. I mean, it was definitely easier as a 20-year-old than it is a 40-year-old to have friends, and I would guess it's maybe even harder. So I would just say, whatever you got to do, you got to have people in your life that love you, that care about you, that are willing to be honest with you, and you got to have some people that will demand intimacy, that will demand a real relationship. Alan, I think the greatest habit that would change every single person's life in here would be to wake up earlier. That was the one for me that changed everything. So a buddy of mine, Chris Carneal, who runs Booster, founder of Booster, Chris did a survey about 5 years ago where he asked about 30 CEOs, hey, what are the habits that have helped you in life? And that was the number one thing that he came back with, was it's all about the morning. And some of you are like, well, I'm not a morning person. James Clear, what is his Atomic Habits book, he says, stop telling yourself that. Quit saying I'm not a morning person. Start telling yourself I am a morning person. If you're trying to run a marathon, you don't tell yourself like, well, I'm not a runner. Tell yourself, no, I am a runner. Like that alone would change things. But for me, waking up earlier in the morning made me go to bed earlier in the morning. It made me watch less television. It made me read the Bible more in the morning. It made me pay attention to what's coming up in the day. I feel like I would have days where I had no idea what was coming up next. I was just being run by my calendar. But getting up earlier made me look out at what was coming up, which allowed me to get prepared for meetings that I was going to be in. If you're in a meeting, you can't lead the meeting unless you're prepared for the meeting. I would be in a position where I was supposed to be leading the meeting, but I had spent no time preparing for the meeting, which in a 360 kind of feedback, one of those deals, anonymous things, the people told me that. They were like, you're not prepared for meetings. Which that was helpful because I was like, man, I was hoping you didn't know that. They're like, we know that you're not. But that was great for me because it allowed me to. So you got to find the reward. The Charles Duhigg stuff on Power of Habits, it's huge. You got to find what's the reward that's going to get you going, that's going to get you up. A lot of people, it's like make a nice coffee. For me, it was the feeling I got to turn the alarm off at our building. I don't know why, but that made me feel, it was like self-gratifying to think I'm the kind of person that gets to the office before anyone else and I turn the alarm off. And that might seem weird. They told me to be real honest. So I'm trying to be real honest. That was gratifying to me. And then I loved the next 2 hours where it was just totally quiet. And I could do, I remember just this feeling of like, I can do whatever I want to do. I could go read if I needed to read. I could get ready for the day. I could write something. I could spend time with the creator of the world. I could do anything. And that feeling of, I've got a couple hours to do anything was pretty huge for me, especially with having 5 kids at home. So that is to me the habit. In the middle, in the black shirt. The best Christian book. I mean, I read Jim Elliot and The Shadow of the Almighty about every 2 or 3 years. That's the book for me. I feel like when I was getting into ministry, that was the book that changed everything for me. I had never read anyone who cared that much about his faith. It was faith. Jim Elliot was a missionary who lost his life trying to tell people in the middle of nowhere, Peru, about Jesus. And I come back. That's one of the only books that I've read multiple times, I would say. So, in the back, next table, Chris, what's up? So Chris said, "Hey, I'm a 7 as well. I have a wife who maybe is not so extroverted. How do I tell her to let me go do more things?" That's what I heard you ask. How do you support her in that? I mean, I don't know. I was going to say, Chris, I was going to be like, man, let me give your wife my wife's number, but the two of them would hate that. It sounds like this has been like the greatest growth in our marriage. So we met in Dallas, Texas. We were in graduate school. She's from Texas, grew up in Texas, born in Texas, never left Texas until I said, "Will you marry me?" And she said yes, and I was like, "Will you move to Georgia?" And she was like, I don't know. So I had been here. I was a college student in Atlanta and was involved in our church, and so then we come back here, and so she doesn't know anyone, and I know everyone, and so it was a real issue. And so I would leave to like, "Hey, I'm going to play basketball with the guys tonight," or "I'm going to Purpose on Tap tonight," or whatever it might be. And she was like, "Real cool. Like, what am I supposed to do?" And then we had kids, and kids helped in a way because there was like a purpose there. But then you feel guilt for so many other reasons, because then you're not helping, and then it's hard, and in the middle of the night there's people waking up and people peeing in your bed and stuff, kids, children peeing in your bed. Yep, not the adults usually. But I would say it's one of those moments where you can love your spouse or you can try to change your spouse. And whichever one you don't do, God's probably going to pick up the other one and do that one. So if you try to change him, he's probably going to be like, "You know what, I'm just going to love him." And if you try to love him, then God just goes, "Hey, we'll try to figure out how to mature this area," right? So I don't know how it happened, but I was able to put my whole schedule on the table and be like, "Okay, whatever is best for you, that's what I want to do." So if you want me to, I remember there's one particular relationship with this ministry that I had worked with for a long time, and she asked me to put it on the table and let's talk about it. And I mean the proverbial table. Like, would you make it available to, if I don't want you to do it, would you be willing to sacrifice, that kind of thing. And I was like, I can't believe you would want me to do that. And through conversation, okay, all right, I will. And I did that I felt like with as much as I could. All right, I'm going to put it all on the table because this relationship is so important. Not my relationship with Chris. My relationship with my wife is so important. And over time, God changed that dynamic to where now if I say, "Hey, I'm leaving to go hang out with the guys," she's like, "Awesome. You need to go do that. That's so good." And you know how life works, that when it's the opposite, when it's like, "Are you serious again?" Like, what does that make you want to do? It makes you want to like leave even more, because you're like, this is miserable, But when she's like, "Go, awesome, have a blast, I can't wait to hear about it," then what does that make you want to do? It makes me like, "Oh my gosh, well now I want to be home." It's crazy. Like, it's amazing how that works. And so that has been, we've got our own challenge. Marriage is work no matter what. Like, if you want to have a great relationship, it takes effort and work. It will not be, we were just talking about this yesterday, that, a lot of times people will be like, "Oh, our marriage is really easy." No good relationship takes zero effort. Any good relationship takes effort. And so our marriage in general has been relatively easy, but it takes work. And one of them is putting everything on the table and say, "Hey, I'm all yours no matter what." But that is the one area that I feel like God has changed most in our relationship. So I would just say, as much as you can defer to her, as much as you can say, "Hey, I'm on your terms." There was a day where like we couldn't double date with a couple, and she would be like, "Why don't you want to hang out with just me?" And I would be like, you laugh because like she said the same thing. And I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, how did I get into this? Like, I totally want to hang out with you, but just you forever? Like, really?" So yeah, but it's not even a thing anymore. Like, it's crazy. Like, we don't ever even have that issue anymore. We still have issues over the in-laws, still, but not that. We don't have that issue anymore. So I would just say there is hope, and as much as you can defer to her, surrender it all, and just beg God to change that if he wants, and then just love her. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. That's awesome. What else? You guys, they earlier, before I got here, they were making fun of a speaker that sweated a lot. And now I'm like, I'm that guy. I don't know what it is, but it is. It feels hot, man. It's on the hot seat, DJ. So, Franklin, there's this research that was done by some buddies of mine in an organization called Exceptional Leader Institute, but the research is real similar to the research that Gallup Group has done, Daniel Goleman with emotional intelligence, all the work he's done around that. But if you were to list out all the things a leader does, a leader drives culture, a leader ensures execution, a leader marshals resources, a leader communicates effectively, a leader casts great vision, a leader is inwardly sound, and a leader is others first. If you were to take all those categories and say which are the two that are the most important, that actually the data says these two attributes, these two categories contribute to more than 75% of a leader's effectiveness. So if you can do just two of these, which one would you want to choose? Which one would you want to do? And most people would say, I mean, the most common answer is communicate effectively. Leaders have to communicate really well. Then people go, well, they have to cast vision. It's vision, right? Because without vision, people perish. Or they say, no, the leaders have to drive culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. But what the data says is that if you want to be a great leader, the answer is you've got to be inwardly sound and you've got to be others focused. That to be inwardly sound, I mean, it means that you're self-aware, that you're aware of your emotions, that you're self-regulated, that you're not whipped around by your emotions, that you know when you feel something. This is like what a toddler can't do, right? You've seen a toddler throw a tantrum. It's because their emotions are winning. We had a leader that worked for me at North Point that I thought was a fabulous leader, but would just have bouts where he could not control his emotions. I saw his team standing in the hallway one day. They were kind of dazed. And I was like, what was going on? They were like, boy, we just had a team meeting. I was like, tell me about it. They were like, well, our boss got mad because we changed the date on something, and he threw an expo marker against the marker board and stormed out. That is an example of someone who is not self-regulated. That is an example of someone who is being whipped around by his emotions. And when you're inwardly sound, you know what you feel and you're not dictated by what you feel. You're able to absorb chaos and breathe out calmness. Daniel Goleman in Emotional Intelligence, Primal Leadership, he says it is the key. It's the thing that's standing between you and where you want to be in your career, but also in your personal life as well. I mean, nobody wants to be married to someone who's an inward mess, right? I mean, we want to be around people that are inwardly sound. And then others focused. I mean, this is the way of Jesus. I mean, Jesus he epitomized being others focused, right? This is showing up at work going, I care about you. I'm not in this for me, I'm in this for you. Most people don't do that. Most people show up at work and they're all in it for me, right? I mean, you've worked for someone who is me-focused. What does it feel like when you work for someone who's me-focused? What does it make you feel like? Inferior? Insignificant? Yeah. You feel like a tool. You feel like a utility. You feel like you are there for them to accomplish what they want to accomplish. You're just a means to their end. That's what it feels like. And it's horrible, right? I mean, it's horrible to work for someone or to work around someone who's just all about themselves. But when you work around someone who is others focused, who's going, hey, I'm about your success. I can't be successful unless you're successful. And when you're successful, I will feel like I have won. That is who everybody wants to work for, who everybody wants to work with. And this big question around retention today, everybody's trying to figure out how to retain employees. The answer is summarized in one question. Do the people that work for you feel like you care about them personally and are invested in their future? If the answer is yes, they'll stick around. And if the answer is no, they're on the way out. And I would say for you as an employee, I think that's an important question to ask. Do I work for someone who cares personally about me and is investing in my future? And if they are, you should stay there, even if they pay less, even if you have to go into work 9 to 5, like in an office complex. I know that'd be bizarre, right? I mean, you should stay and work for them. But as soon as you start feeling like, no, I don't think they really care about me, they're not investing in me, I think it's worth looking around, because there's places you can go, people you can work for that do. So I think that data is super helpful for me, is how can we become more inwardly sound? How can we become more others focused? I mean, this is Jesus. Jesus said, he said, I didn't come to be served, but to serve and give my life as a ransom for others. I mean, this is what he did all the time, is he was in it for other people. He was not in it for himself. So I think that's what we all got to continue to develop into, because I think that's the future of leadership. Thank you. Calder, it's on you, bro.